Ayara had always known that her life would be one of hardship, but she never imagined it would be like this. She was just a young girl when her mother passed away, leaving her in the hands of her cruel and spiteful stepmother. The village was small and quiet, nestled among the hills, far away from the bustling cities, where the people's lives were closely intertwined, and rumors traveled faster than wind. But none of the village gossip could ever prepare Ayara for what was to come. Her stepmother, Imara, had never liked her. From the very beginning, Ayara's beauty was something that gnawed at Imara's insides. The villagers would often whisper about how Ayara had inherited her mother's graceful features, dark, shining hair, almond-shaped eyes that held the depth of someone who had seen more than their years should allow, and a delicate frame that caught the eye of every passerby. But it wasn't just her looks that bothered Imara. Ayara had inherited something more precious, the love of her late mother. Imara, on the other hand, had married Ayara's father long after Ayara's birth, and no matter how hard she tried to fill the void left by the girl's mother, she had never quite succeeded. Ayara was the last reminder of a time before Imara, and that gnawed at her. She was constantly reminded of Ayara's mother's beauty and charm, which she could never replicate. This jealousy soon turned to cruelty. Imara would often find trivial excuses to lash out at Ayara, pushing her to do all the housework while never once offering a kind word. The chores were endless, scrubbing the floors until they gleamed, fetching water from the well in the cold mornings, tending to the animals, and preparing meals for a family that never showed her any kindness. And the cruelty wasn't just limited to physical labor. Imara's verbal barbs cut deeper than any blade could, calling Ayara lazy, worthless, and even ugly despite the fact that the girl had never once acted out of line. Each word dripped with venom, and Ayara, though strong in spirit, began to feel as though her own worth was slipping away. But the worst was yet to come. One fateful day, after a minor mistake in the kitchen, Imara snapped. The smallest mistake, a forgotten ingredient or a misstep in the recipe, had become an unforgivable sin in her eyes. Ayara, as usual, took the brunt of her wrath, and this time, it would be unlike any punishment she had ever faced. Imara's eyes glittered with malice, a plan forming in her mind as she turned to the corner of the room where a cauldron sat, bubbling with a strange, acidic solution. The villagers used it in rare, sacred rituals, believing it had the power to cleanse and purify. But Imara saw it differently. She saw it as the perfect tool to break Ayara, to destroy everything she had left. Enough, Imara hissed. You've made my life a living hell for long enough. I'll make sure you'll never be able to show your face again. She grabbed Ayara by the wrist, pulling her toward the cauldron, her grip like iron. The air around them smelled of burning chemicals, and Ayara's heart pounded in her chest. The villagers knew the cauldron's purpose and its power, but none of them dared intervene. They all stood by, watching the spectacle unfold, frozen in fear, unwilling to risk Imara's wrath. As Ayara was forced toward the cauldron, her skin crawled, the warmth from the burning acid making her stomach twist. But she didn't fight. She knew that fighting would only make things worse. She had endured years of torment, physical and emotional, and now this final punishment would be the ultimate test of her strength. She had no illusions about what was happening. Her life as she knew it was ending. But something inside of her, something fierce and unrelenting, refused to break. Imara's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, thinking that this would be the end of Ayara. The girl would be ruined, scarred beyond recognition, and forever silent. As Ayara stepped into the cauldron, the acid seared her skin, the pain unlike anything she had ever felt before. She bit her lip to stifle the scream, determined not to let Imara see her break. The villagers gasped, and some even turned away, unable to witness the horror. But no one moved. No one intervened. As Ayara's skin bubbled and burned, she focused on one thing: survival. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, on something beyond the immediate pain. She thought of the day she would escape this torment. She thought of the freedom that lay outside the reach of Imara's cruelty. And in that moment the pain didn't seem so unbearable. She clung to the memory of her mother's face, her mother's voice, and the love that had once filled their home. The acid burned her body but not her spirit. Imara stood by the cauldron, watching with twisted satisfaction, believing that Ayara's spirit was finally crushed. But as the girl stood there, amidst the pain and suffering, something unexpected happened. The acid began to work its way deeper into her flesh, but rather than destroying her, it seemed to awaken something ancient and untamed inside of her. She could feel the power building, like a flame flickering to life in the darkness. The more the acid burned, the more Ayara's body seemed to resist, as though her scars were shaping into something greater. something more powerful than the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. The villagers watched in awe and fear as Ayara remained standing, unyielding, her face contorted with pain but her eyes unflinching. Imara's satisfaction slowly turned to confusion, then fear as she began to realize that Ayara was not broken. She was becoming something else entirely, something stronger, something that could not be controlled. And Ayara, in that moment, understood that she had survived this torture for a reason. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The villagers might have thought they were witnessing her destruction, but instead they were witnessing her transformation. From the ashes of her suffering, something fierce and unstoppable was born. In silence, Ayara stepped out of the cauldron, her body now a map of scars, each one a testament to her survival. Her stepmother stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Ayara had not been broken. She had been forged. As the villagers watched in stunned silence, Ayara took her first steps forward, her body still bleeding but her heart filled with something far greater than the pain. She was no longer the girl who had been tormented by a cruel stepmother. She was something more, something that could not be contained. The village would never forget what they had witnessed that day, and neither would Ayara. Ayara's body had been marked by pain, but her spirit remained untouched. The acid, which had been meant to break her, had instead transformed her. It was not only her skin that had been scarred, but the experience itself had carved something new into her soul, something unbreakable. As she stumbled away from the cauldron, blood dripping from her wounds, she felt something change within her. Her body was not the same, but her heart was stronger than ever. She did not return to the village immediately. The eyes of the villagers had always followed her with judgment, but after the horrific scene at the cauldron, she knew they would never look at her the same again. She didn't want their pity nor their fear. Their whispers would only remind her of what had been done to her, but Ayara had learned to tune them out long ago. Instead, she sought solace in the only place she had ever truly felt free, the forest. The trees, with their ancient roots and thick canopies, welcomed her like a lost child returned home. Ayara stumbled through the underbrush, the pain from the acid still fresh, but she pressed on. Her body ached, and each step felt like it took all the strength she had left, but she kept moving. She found a small hidden clearing deep within the forest, where the sunlight barely pierced the thick leaves. There she collapsed under the shelter of an ancient oak tree, her body trembling with exhaustion. For days Ayara did not move from the forest. She had no one and nothing to return to in the village. She was an outcast, a girl whose very presence seemed to provoke disgust, but the forest did not care. Here she was just another part of the natural world, where pain and survival were intertwined in ways the villagers could never understand. She began to heal not only physically but emotionally as well. The pain from the acid burned through her skin, but in its wake, it left something different behind, something that felt like power. As she rested, Ayara began to notice something strange. Her scars, which were once nothing more than reminders of torment, seemed to shimmer under the light of the moon. She thought it was a trick of her weary eyes, but it became impossible to ignore. The scars across her skin caught the moonlight in a way that made them glow faintly as though they were alive. The marks, once seen as the sign of her suffering, now appeared to pulse with a strange energy, an energy that resonated with the earth beneath her feet. Her wounds had begun to heal in ways that defied logic. The acid had burned deep, scarring her flesh permanently, but the healing process was unlike anything she had ever known. Her skin, though damaged, was no longer soft and fragile. It had become tough, resilient, like leather, and while the pain still lingered, it was accompanied by a strange sense of power she couldn't explain. The marks on her skin seemed to tell a story of survival, of defiance in the face of unimaginable cruelty, and they glowed with a force that Ayara had not yet understood. She spent her days in the forest, allowing herself to heal both inside and out. Her connection to the earth seemed to deepen with each passing day. She could feel the pulse of life in the trees, the rhythm of the wind, and the heartbeat of the land beneath her. It was as if the earth itself had accepted her, had recognized her strength. Her scars no longer felt like a curse. They were her marks of survival, and they were beautiful in their own right. They were a testament to everything she had endured and overcome. The villagers, however, could not understand what had happened to her. Their gossip spread like wildfire, each person more certain than the last that Ayara had been cursed. They whispered that her beauty had been destroyed, that she was no longer the girl they once knew. They wondered if the scars would spread, or if she was now untouchable, a creature of darkness or spirit. But Ayara paid them no mind. She could feel their eyes on her, but she did not let their words affect her. The judgments of the village no longer held weight over her. She had learned that her worth was not tied to their approval or their pity. Her worth was defined by her survival, by her refusal to be broken. Her scars, the marks that had once been her shame, were now her strength, and they told a story of resilience, something that could not be erased or ignored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the moon began to rise, Ayara stood at the edge of the clearing. The moonlight bathed her in its cool glow, and for a moment she was still. She closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythm of the world around her, the wind, the rustling of leaves, the hum of the earth beneath her feet. And then she began to dance. It was a slow, measured movement at first, testing the limits of her newly scarred body. But as she moved, she felt the rhythm deep within her bones. It was like the forest was calling to her, urging her to dance, to move with the pulse of the earth. With each step, her scars seemed to shimmer brighter, glowing like embers in the night. She twirled, her feet pressing into the soil, grounding her, and the scars on her skin seemed to ignite with life. The more she danced, the more the energy within her surged, and she could feel the earth itself responding to her movements. The dance was not just a release, it was a connection. It was as though the rhythm of her body matched the beat of the earth, the fire of her scars merging with the heartbeat of the world around her. She danced for herself, for the girl she had been, and for the woman she was becoming. Her scars, once symbols of pain, were now marks of power, of transformation. As the night wore on, Ayara felt something she had never felt before: peace. The weight of her past, the pain of her suffering, the shame of her scars, all of it began to fade away, leaving only the power of the moment. She was not broken. She was not a victim. She was a force, and her scars, glowing under the moonlight, were proof of her strength. The villagers, from their distant homes, could hear the faint sound of drums in the distance, a rhythm that seemed to come from deep within the forest itself. They wondered who was dancing, but no one dared to venture into the woods to find out. They feared what they did not understand. But Ayara did not care. She had found her own rhythm, and it was enough. For the first time since the acid bath, Ayara felt truly free. Her scars had been a prison, but now they were her wings. They did not define her. She defined them. The village might see her as a monster, a cursed girl, but Ayara knew the truth. She was no longer the girl they had once known. She was something more, something untouchable, something powerful. And as she danced beneath the moon, her scars shimmering like stars, Ayara understood that she had become something that no one could ever destroy. Ayara had never imagined that her scars could hold such power. When she first left the village, her mind had been consumed by her suffering, her pain, and the deep betrayal she had felt. Her body was an ugly map of wounds, each one a reminder of the cruelty she had endured. But as the days passed in the forest, she began to realize that the marks left on her skin were not just a sign of what she had survived. They were the key to something much more profound. At first it had been subtle. Her scars, which glowed faintly under the moonlight, began to change in a way she couldn't understand. The forest, which had once been a place of refuge, now felt like something more, a living, breathing entity. The earth beneath her feet hummed with energy, and the winds whispered her name. Ayara could feel the heartbeat of the land, its pulse syncing with her own, and she sensed that her scars were not just physical. They were a bridge to something ancient, something that connected her to the spirits of the earth and her ancestors. It was during one of her solitary walks through the forest that Ayara began to experiment with her newfound power. The air was thick with the scent of rain and damp earth. As she moved through the woods, her feet pressed softly into the ground, and she noticed something strange. Flowers bloomed where her footsteps had fallen, vibrant petals opening to the sunlight as if in response to her touch. The trees seemed to lean toward her, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air itself felt charged as if it were alive with energy. Ayara paused, staring at the ground beneath her. She had always known there was something special about the forest, something sacred. But now she could feel the earth responding to her. She closed her eyes and placed her palm on the ground, the rough bark of the tree beneath her fingertips. She focused, willing herself to connect with the energy around her, to understand its rhythm. It was then that she felt it. The energy surged up through her scars, a warmth that spread from the tips of her fingers and into her chest. She could hear the whispers of the earth growing louder, and for the first time, Ayara understood what it was telling her. She wasn't just connected to the forest, she was part of it. Her scars had become conduits for the ancient power of the land. They weren't just a symbol of suffering, they were a source of life. The realization hit her like a wave and she gasped. She had always thought that the acid bath had destroyed her, that it had left her broken. But now she understood that it had done the opposite. It had unlocked something within her, something she could barely comprehend. Her scars were not just marks of pain, they were symbols of transformation. And through them she could heal. Days later, Ayara's discovery was put to the test. She was walking along the edge of the forest when a small creature, an injured deer, stumbled out from the trees. Its leg was twisted and bloody, its eyes wide with fear. Ayara's heart sank at the sight of the animal's suffering. She had spent so much of her life running from pain, avoiding it at all costs. But now something within her stirred. She could no longer turn her back on the pain of others. Without thinking, Ayara knelt beside the deer, her hands trembling. She reached out, touching its head gently. The deer flinched at first, but when it realized that Ayara meant no harm, it grew still. As her fingers brushed against its fur, she felt the same warmth that had surged through her earlier. It began in her scars, this time spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Slowly, carefully, she placed her palm on the wound at the deer's leg, and the warmth in her body intensified. For a long moment nothing happened. But then she felt the wound begin to heal. The skin around the injury knitted together, the blood and torn tissue pulling back into place as though the animal's body had remembered how to repair itself. The deer's leg straightened, the bone shifting back into alignment. Ayara's breath caught in her throat as she watched the transformation before her eyes. The warmth that had filled her hands spread into the earth beneath her, and the ground seemed to absorb the energy, responding with a soft hum. The deer stood, its leg now whole and strong. It looked at Ayara for a long moment as if trying to understand what had just happened, and then with a final glance, it bounded back into the forest, free from the pain that had once held it captive. Ayara sat back on her heels, her mind spinning. She had healed the deer just by touching it, just by allowing the energy within her to flow freely. The scars that had once been the symbol of her suffering were now the source of her strength. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances, she was a healer. And with this power came a deep responsibility. As Ayara began to understand the extent of her abilities, she realized that her scars were not just capable of healing physical wounds, they could also heal emotional ones. She had always felt disconnected from the world around her, isolated by her pain. But now she knew that she could offer healing to others, not just in body but in spirit. She ventured back to the village, her body still covered in scars, but her heart full of purpose. The villagers who had once seen her as a cursed girl, now looked at her with a mix of awe and fear. They watched as Ayara walked among them, her presence quiet but powerful. The children who had once taunted her now looked up to her with respect, and even the elders, who had turned a blind eye to her suffering, felt the pull of her energy. One by one the villagers came to her, some seeking her help for physical ailments, others with wounds of the heart. Ayara's touch was gentle but firm, and each time she healed someone she felt her power grow. She was no longer just a girl with scars, she was a woman with purpose, a healer who could restore not just bodies but lives. But as Ayara's powers grew, so did the complexity of her responsibility. She was no longer just a survivor of her stepmother's cruelty, she was a protector of the land, a keeper of its ancient magic. She knew that she could not stay in the village forever. There were greater forces at work, and the earth had more to offer her than she could yet understand. Her scars were not just a mark of survival, they were the key to something much larger. And so, Ayara began her journey anew, knowing that her scars, once seen as a curse, had become her greatest gift. Through them she could heal the world. But she had much to learn and much more to give. The journey ahead would be long, but Ayara was ready. She was no longer just a girl with scars. She was a healer, a force of nature, and nothing would ever break her again. Ayara had spent many months in the forest, away from the village that had been both her home and her prison. The transformation that had taken place within her was profound, not only in her physical appearance but also in her spirit. The acid that had once marked her as a victim had now become a symbol of her strength. Her scars, which had once been sources of shame, now glowed with an ethereal energy. They pulsed softly in the moonlight, a testament to the power she had awakened within herself. Her connection to the earth, to something ancient and primal, had changed her. She had become not just a survivor but a force of nature. As she walked back toward the village, Ayara felt a sense of peace she had never known. The forest had taught her many things. It had shown her the depth of her own strength and the true meaning of healing. She had come to understand that her scars were not just a reflection of her suffering, but a source of power that could be used to heal and protect. But now, she was ready to return to the place where her journey had begun. She was ready to confront the past and reclaim her place in the world. The villagers were gathered in the town square when Ayara emerged from the forest, her form barely visible against the backdrop of trees. At first they did not recognize her. The girl they had once known had been broken and beaten, a shadow of her former self. But the woman who stood before them now was different. Her presence was commanding, and there was a quiet strength in her every movement. The ethereal glow of her scars cast an almost otherworldly light on her face, and the villagers could feel the power that radiated from her. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. Some stared in awe, others in fear. They could not deny the transformation that had taken place within Ayara. She was no longer the girl they had once ignored and abused, she was something more. Some saw her as a healer, a savior, while others saw her as something to be feared. The village had never known power like this and they didn't know what to make of it. But it was not just the villagers who were affected by Ayara's return. Her stepmother, who had grown bitter and resentful over the years, watched from the shadows, her eyes filled with anger. She had always despised Ayara, and now, seeing the girl she had once tortured transformed into something powerful, she felt threatened. Her jealousy and hatred burned even fiercer, and she refused to acknowledge Ayara's newfound strength. She could not accept the reality that her stepdaughter, whom she had tried to break, had become more powerful than she ever imagined. Ayara approached the center of the village with steady, deliberate steps, her scars glowing softly in the afternoon light. The crowd parted to make way for her, some stepping back in fear, others watching with awe. Her stepmother stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed, her face a mask of bitterness. Ayara did not speak immediately. She took a moment to let the silence settle over the village, to let the weight of her presence sink in. The villagers were waiting, uncertain of what she would say or do. She could feel their eyes on her, the judgment, the awe, and the fear. But she was no longer afraid. The forest had shown her who she was. She had come to terms with her past, and now, it was time to confront the people who had once been her family and her tormentors. Finally Ayara spoke, her voice clear and strong. I stand before you today, not as the broken girl you once knew, but as a woman who has found her strength. You all saw what my stepmother did to me and I ask you now, what did you do? You turned your backs, you let her hurt me and you said nothing. You let me suffer. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes in shame. Ayara's gaze swept over the crowd, taking in their reactions. She could see the guilt in their faces, but there was also a flicker of something else, something that had not been there before. Respect. I was forced to endure pain, Ayara continued, her voice growing steadier, but I am not broken. I stand here today with these scars, not as a mark of weakness, but as a symbol of what I have survived. These scars are my power. They are what have made me who I am. As Ayara spoke, the crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some of the villagers, who had once been indifferent to her suffering, now seemed to understand. They could see the strength in her, the quiet power that radiated from her very being. The energy in the air had shifted. Ayara was no longer just a victim, she was a force to be reckoned with. But her stepmother remained unmoved. She glared at Ayara, her lips curled in disdain. You are nothing but a freak, she spat, her voice thick with venom. These scars will never make you whole. You are nothing more than a monster. Ayara's eyes locked with her stepmother's, and for the first time in years she felt no fear. I am not a monster, she said calmly. I am a healer. And I will no longer allow you to hide behind your cruelty. With that, Ayara stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the village. She had endured enough. No longer would she allow herself to be silenced. No longer would she allow herself to be defined by the cruelty of others. As she spoke, her voice carrying over the crowd, Ayara began to demonstrate her power. She reached out to the soil beneath her feet and let her hands hover just above it. Slowly the ground began to respond. The plants, once dry and withered, began to bloom before the villagers' eyes. The air seemed to hum with life as Ayara's energy flowed into the earth, restoring it to its former vitality. The villagers watched in stunned silence as Ayara's magic filled the village square. Flowers bloomed where she stepped, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with energy. Her scars, glowing with an ethereal light, became a symbol of hope and renewal. She was no longer the broken girl they had once feared. She was a healer, a protector. Her stepmother, unable to cope with Ayara's transformation, shrank back into the crowd, her face pale with fear and rage. She could no longer control Ayara, and the realization was too much for her to bear. Her grip on the village had weakened, and Ayara had become a force that no one could ignore. As Ayara stood before the villagers, she knew her work was just beginning. She was no longer the victim of her stepmother's cruelty. She had become something more, a protector, a healer, and a symbol of strength. She would continue to use her gifts to heal the land, to help those who had suffered, and to protect the village from the darkness that had once consumed her. And so, the village slowly began to change. What had once been a place of fear and neglect became a place of healing and renewal. Ayara's presence in the village brought hope to those who had been broken, and her magic began to spread, touching every corner of the land. But for Ayara, her journey was far from over. There were still more people to heal, more lives to touch. And she would not rest until her scars were no longer seen as symbols of pain, but as reminders of the power that could come from the most unlikely of places. Her stepmother, on the other hand, would eventually disappear into the shadows of the village, unable to withstand the power Ayara had gained. She had underestimated her stepdaughter and in doing so, had unleashed a force she could not control. As Ayara's powers grew stronger, her reputation spread far beyond the village. She had become a beacon of hope, a living testament to the healing power of resilience and transformation. The land around her thrived, animals were nurtured back to health, and crops flourished as if the earth itself recognized her as a guardian. The villagers, once fearful and hesitant, now sought her help. They had witnessed the miraculous changes she had brought about, but not everyone shared in the growing respect for Ayara. Her stepmother, who had never been able to stand Ayara's resilience, found herself consumed by a bitter jealousy. Her hatred of Ayara's strength, her healing touch, and the respect the villagers had for her had long since festered into something dangerous. Ayara's very existence had become a constant reminder of everything the stepmother had failed to destroy. No longer able to stand the sight of her stepdaughter's transformation, the stepmother devised one final plan to rid herself of Ayara for good. On one fateful night, as Ayara tended to her sanctuary, a small grove of trees she had cultivated for healing, her stepmother set a fire, hoping to burn Ayara and her newfound power into nothingness. She poured oil on the dry grass, setting it ablaze with a match and stepping back to watch as the flames crept toward the sanctuary. Her plan was simple: destroy Ayara's connection to the earth and perhaps, by extension, destroy her. At first, the fire seemed unstoppable. It spread quickly, licking at the trees and shrubs Ayara had carefully nurtured. The sky above turned a deep orange as the flames climbed higher. The crackling of the fire echoed through the forest, and for a moment, it seemed as though Ayara's sanctuary, and all that she had worked for, was about to be consumed. But Ayara was not the same fragile girl who had once been beaten by her stepmother. She had endured unimaginable pain, and now, her connection to the earth was so strong that she could feel the fire's heat before it even reached her. She knew what was coming and she stood her ground, her heart steady and her mind focused. As the flames neared, Ayara stepped forward, her scars glowing with an otherworldly light. She reached out, her hands glowing with energy, and for the first time she fully embraced her power. The earth seemed to respond to her touch. The flames slowed, and then, as if pushed by an invisible force, they began to retreat. The fire was being pushed back, not by water but by Ayara's power, drawn from the very earth she had healed and nurtured. Her scars pulsed with the energy of the land, a beacon of life and resistance against the destruction her stepmother had wrought. The villagers who had gathered at the edge of the forest watched in stunned silence. They had seen Ayara heal the land, restore life, and even mend the broken. But this was something they had never imagined. The flames, once wild and unchecked, were now held at bay by Ayara's will, and the fire seemed to bow to her power. The crackling of the flames was drowned out by the hum of energy that filled the air. As Ayara stood at the center of the grove, the fire receding around her, the villagers began to understand the depth of her connection to the earth. She was not just a healer, she was a force of nature itself. Her scars, once seen as symbols of pain, had become a manifestation of the earth's strength. They were not just marks of survival, they were the embodiment of life, resilience, and protection. Her stepmother, watching from the shadows, seethed with rage. The fire that she had started had failed. Her plan had backfired. She had underestimated Ayara, and now she stood there, unable to undo the damage she had caused. The stepmother's rage, which had once been her fuel, had only left her weak and powerless in the face of Ayara's strength. Ayara turned to face her stepmother, her eyes calm but resolute. The woman who had once tormented her was nothing now but a hollow shell of her former self. She had come to the village to destroy, to tear apart, and to dominate. But in the end, it was Ayara who had become the true force of power. The energy that radiated from her was palpable, and the villagers who had once feared her stepmother, now looked at Ayara with awe and respect. The stepmother, her face contorted in a mixture of anger and disbelief, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you're some sort of goddess. But you are nothing. You're just a freak with scars, and nothing you do will ever change that." Ayara's gaze remained steady. She did not need to respond to her stepmother's venom. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. In that moment, she realized that the stepmother's cruelty was not her burden to carry anymore. She had already broken free from it, and now it was time for her to release the past. "I do not seek revenge," Ayara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her power. "But you have made your choices, and now you must face them." With a wave of her hand, Ayara summoned the earth to her will once more. The ground beneath the stepmother's feet shifted, as if the very soil rejected her presence. The villagers watched as Ayara's magic enveloped the stepmother, pulling her away from the village, pushing her toward the edge of the land she had once tried to control. There was no violence in Ayara's actions, only the quiet, unyielding force of the earth itself. The stepmother struggled, but she was powerless against Ayara's strength. The villagers, once too afraid to intervene, now watched with a sense of liberation. They saw Ayara not as the victim but as the protector. With one final, pitiful glance at Ayara, the stepmother was forced to leave the village. The earth parted beneath her, creating a path that led her far away. She was banished from the land she had once ruled through fear. Her power, once so formidable, had been rendered meaningless by the very force she had sought to destroy. The villagers, watching the stepmother disappear into the distance, felt a shift in the air. For the first time in years they could breathe freely. Ayara had not only defeated her stepmother, she had freed them all from the grip of fear and cruelty that had bound them for so long. Her magic had changed the land, had healed it, and now, with the stepmother gone, Ayara could finally bring the peace and prosperity that the village so desperately needed. As the villagers gathered around Ayara, they no longer saw her as a girl with scars, but as the protector and healer they had long needed. Her strength, her compassion, and her power had transformed not only the land but the hearts of those who had once turned their backs on her. Ayara had come full circle. The girl who had once been broken by her stepmother's cruelty had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and hope. And as she stood among the villagers, watching the land bloom once more, she knew that her journey was far from over. The fire had been quenched, the scars had healed, and the stepmother had been vanquished. But Ayara's true mission, to heal, to protect, and to guide, was just beginning. With her stepmother gone, Ayara stood at the threshold of a new life, one free from the torment and cruelty that had once shackled her. The village, once hesitant and fearful of her, now looked at her with respect. She had not only survived but had turned her scars into symbols of strength and transformation. What was once a mark of suffering had now become a beacon of hope, a living reminder of the power of resilience. Ayara had become more than a healer, she had become a symbol of everything the village had needed to believe in, that the earth could heal, that pain could be transformed, and that hope could rise from even the deepest suffering. The first thing Ayara did after the stepmother's departure was to open a sanctuary. It was a place for the broken and the lost, for those who needed healing of the body and spirit. She had learned to heal the land, and now she began to teach others how to heal themselves. Her sanctuary was nestled at the edge of the forest, near the grove where her power had first blossomed. It was a quiet, peaceful place, filled with the scent of herbs and flowers, with the sound of wind rustling through the leaves. The air itself seemed to hum with the energy of life. It was here that Ayara would teach her people the art of healing through nature, how to connect to the earth, to listen to its rhythms, and to use the power of the land to heal physical wounds and emotional scars. As word of her sanctuary spread, people from neighboring villages came to learn from her. They sought Ayara's guidance, not only because of her power but because of the warmth and compassion she radiated. Ayara had become more than just a healer, she had become a mother figure, a source of strength and comfort for those who had been broken by their own hardships. The villagers who had once feared her now found solace in her presence, and they came to her not just for healing but for hope. Ayara had always believed that healing wasn't just about mending wounds, it was about helping people find their strength again, about teaching them to reclaim what had been lost. And so, her sanctuary became a place of learning and growth, where people were taught not only to heal others but to heal themselves. She encouraged them to embrace their scars, to see them not as marks of weakness but as symbols of endurance, of survival, and of transformation. "Your scars are not the end," Ayara would tell them. "They are the beginning. They are proof that you have fought and lived, and now you are stronger for it." In the sanctuary, Ayara would teach her students how to harness the healing properties of plants, how to listen to the earth's whispers, and how to use their energy to bring peace to themselves and others. But she also taught them something deeper: how to heal the heart, how to let go of the pain that had been carried for too long. She understood, perhaps more than anyone, that true healing came not just from the physical, but from the emotional and spiritual wounds. The scars she wore were not just physical; they had shaped her into the woman she had become. They had given her the strength to stand tall, even when the world had tried to break her. As the months passed, Ayara's sanctuary flourished. The village, once desolate and full of suffering, began to thrive. Crops grew in abundance, and the air was filled with the sound of children's laughter and the hum of busy villagers. The people who came to Ayara's sanctuary found not just physical healing, but a renewed sense of purpose and strength. They learned to trust in themselves and in the earth, and they discovered that they too had the power to heal and to help others. Ayara's influence spread beyond the village. People traveled from distant lands to seek her out, and her name became synonymous with strength, resilience, and hope. She had transformed not only her own life but the lives of those around her. She had taken the pain and suffering she had endured and turned it into something beautiful, a sanctuary for others to find peace, healing, and purpose. As Ayara's powers grew, she continued to deepen her connection to the earth. Her scars, once a source of shame, had become a constant reminder of the life she had lived and the strength she had gained. Her touch, once capable only of healing the land, now had the power to heal people's hearts. She could ease their pain, both physical and emotional, and bring them back to life in a way that no medicine ever could. Ayara had learned to channel her power not just for herself, but for others, and she had become a guiding light in the lives of many. But as much as she had helped others, Ayara had not forgotten the pain she had experienced. She knew that there would always be people who would suffer, who would face hardship and cruelty. But now she understood that her power was not just about healing, it was about protection. She was not just a healer, she was a protector of those who could not protect themselves. She had survived for a reason, and now she would use that strength to ensure that others would not have to endure the same pain she had. The earth had given her a second chance, and she would not waste it. In time, Ayara became known not just as a healer but as a leader, a guide for those who had been lost, a source of strength for those who had been broken. She became a mother figure to many, nurturing those who needed healing and offering them a place to find peace. She had created a new family in the village, one that was built on compassion, strength, and love. Ayara was no longer just a girl with scars; she was a force of nature, a protector of her people, and a symbol of everything that the village had come to represent: resilience, hope, and the power of the earth. Under Ayara's care, the village flourished. It became a place of peace and prosperity, a sanctuary where people came to heal, to grow, and to become stronger. Ayara's name spread far and wide, and her legacy became a part of the land itself. She had turned her pain into power, and in doing so, she had given others the strength to do the same. Ayara had learned the most important lesson of all: that healing, true healing, comes not just from the earth but from within. It comes from embracing the scars, from accepting the pain, and from finding the strength to move forward. She had done that, and in doing so, she had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The scars that had once marked her as a victim had become her greatest strength, and she had transformed them into something beautiful, a symbol of hope, healing, and the unbreakable spirit of the earth itself. And so, Ayara's story continued, her name becoming synonymous with resilience, strength, and healing. The village that had once been broken by cruelty was now a place of peace, a place where those who had suffered could find solace and strength. Ayara had become a legend not because of her powers, but because of her heart, the heart of a healer, a protector, and a mother. She had taken the pain of her past and turned it into something that would heal not just the land, but the hearts of all who came to her. Years passed, and Ayara's name became more than just a story; it became a living legend, woven into the fabric of her village and beyond. The scars that had once marked her as a victim of cruelty were now revered as symbols of her strength, resilience, and the transformative power of suffering. What had been meant as her punishment had become the very thing that made her untouchable, a testament to her endurance and the deep, unbreakable connection she had to the earth. The villagers, once fearful of her power, now looked to her with awe and reverence. She was no longer just the girl who had survived; she had become a symbol, a living myth that would inspire generations to come. Ayara's sanctuary, once a quiet refuge for the broken, became a pilgrimage site for those seeking healing. Kings, queens, and warriors, people of great power and influence, came from all corners of the land, drawn by the legend of the healer with the scars that glowed like fire. They sought her touch, hoping that the magic she carried within her could heal their wounds, both physical and emotional. But Ayara, true to her humble nature, never sought fame or recognition. She always returned to the sanctuary she had built in the forest, where the air was thick with the scent of wild herbs, and the earth hummed with life. She welcomed all who came, offering them not just physical healing but the wisdom she had gained from her own suffering. To her, healing was not just about mending the body, it was about restoring balance to the soul. She taught the people who came to her that true beauty did not lie in what could be seen with the eyes, but in the strength of the spirit, the ability to endure and overcome adversity. She spoke of her scars not as marks of shame, but as symbols of the power that lay within every person, the power to survive, to rise above hardship, and to become something greater than what they had been before. Through her teachings, Ayara helped the next generation of women understand that their worth was not defined by their physical appearance or by the cruelty they had endured. She showed them that true beauty was the strength to carry on, to heal, and to become a force of nature in their own right. She instilled in them the belief that every challenge, every wound, could be turned into an opportunity for growth, and that they too could heal not only themselves but others. Ayara became not just a healer, but a mentor, a guide for those who would carry her legacy forward. The village itself flourished under Ayara's care. It became a place where people came not just to find healing but to learn the art of living in harmony with the earth. The crops grew abundantly, and the people found peace in the rhythm of the seasons, the cycles of birth, growth, and renewal. The village had once been a place of suffering where cruelty and fear reigned. But now it was a place of transformation, a sanctuary for the soul, where people could find not just healing for their bodies, but for their hearts as well. Ayara's sanctuary had become the heart of the village, a place where hope and healing flowed as freely as the rivers. As the years passed, Ayara's story continued to spread. It was told and retold by bards, passed down from one generation to the next. Her name became synonymous with strength, resilience, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. The younger generations grew up hearing the tale of the girl who had endured the greatest cruelty and transformed it into something beautiful. They looked to her as a model of how to face the hardships of life and emerge stronger on the other side. Her scars, once seen as marks of shame, became a symbol of the village itself, a reminder that no matter how deep the pain, there was always the possibility of healing, growth, and renewal. But even as her story spread, Ayara remained humble, never seeking recognition or fame. She continued to live in the sanctuary she had built, surrounded by the forest and the earth that had given her power. She knew that her role was not to become a legend, but to help others find their own strength, to pass on the wisdom she had gained through her suffering. And so, she continued to teach, to heal, and to guide the people who came to her, always reminding them that the greatest power lay within themselves. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, Ayara would sit beneath the trees of the forest, her hands resting on the earth, feeling the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. She would think back to the time when she had first felt the sting of acid on her skin, when the world had seemed so dark and cruel. And she would smile, knowing that her scars, the very things that had once been meant to destroy her, had instead become the source of her strength and her power. They had transformed her into someone she never could have imagined, someone who could heal not just herself but others as well. Ayara's legacy lived on in the hearts of the people she had healed, in the stories they told of her, and in the lessons she had passed down. Her scars, once symbols of suffering, had become symbols of hope. And in that, Ayara had done more than just survive. She had risen above the pain and in doing so had given others the strength to rise as well. The village, once broken, had been healed, and the spirit of Ayara lived on in every person who carried her lessons in their hearts. As the years turned into decades, and the generations that followed her carried on her work, Ayara's name became immortal. She was no longer just a healer, she was a legend. And though she had long since passed from the earth, her spirit remained, alive in the hearts of the people who had been touched by her power, her compassion, and her wisdom. The village continued to thrive, and the earth continued to bloom beneath her healing touch. The scars that had once been marks of suffering had become a symbol of the endurance and strength of the human spirit, a reminder that even the greatest pain could be transformed into something beautiful. Ayara's legacy was not just in the village she had healed, but in the world that had been forever changed by her. Her name would be spoken for generations to come, not as a reminder of the pain she had endured, but as a celebration of the strength she had found in that pain, and the healing she had brought to the world. The legend of Ayara, the healer with the scars, would never be forgotten.